So, thus far, we have been discussing consequentialism and some of its problems. And let me first remind you that consequentialism is the moral theory according to which the rightness or wrongness of an action is based entirely on its consequences. These consequences are generally understood in terms of happiness, unhappiness, pleasure, pain that the action causes to those affected. So, for consequentialism, the morally right action is the one that brings about the best overall consequences. Consequentialism is a really powerful moral theory, a very powerful tool for us to make moral judgments and also to account for our moral intuitions of what is right and what is wrong. However, I think that consequentialism has some serious problems and limitations, and I'm going to discuss some examples that show those limitations. I'm going to refer to a movie that I have just recently watched, American Gangster, which provides some really excellent examples, both of situations in which consequentialism can be successfully applied to formulate a moral judgment, and of situations in which consequentialism really um, cannot help us account for our moral intuitions and the moral judgments that we make pre-philosophically, so to speak. First, an example of consequentialism being successfully applied to a situation. The movie American Gangster, Ridley Scott movie. At the end of the movie, the bad guy, the drug lord, Frank Lucas, played by Denzel Washington, is finally caught and brought to justice. And he's a ruthless killer, and he is responsible for the deaths of many, many people. And yet, he ends up with a very light sentence because a deal is offered to him. And in exchange for his cooperation, his sentence is drastically reduced. So Frank Lucas really helps police make hundreds of arrests, both of drug dealers and corrupt policemen. And the question, of course, if having such a deal, offering such a deal to a really bad person, a ruthless killer, is morally defensible, is the morally right thing to do. And we are familiar with these situations from many TV police dramas. And I think that in spite of our uneasiness, there are some issues that have to do with justice and desert that make us a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that ultimately our considered moral judgment is that this is the right thing to do, that this deal is actually morally right. And consequentialism explains why, guides in our intuition and explains why this is right. Because the deal has the best overall consequences. Hundreds of evil, dangerous people are taken off the streets. Society is happier and safer and healthier as a result. So this is the right thing to do. So consequentialism here, I think, applies successfully. But then there is another example in the movie, the beginning of the movie, that raises some serious problems for consequentialism. And this is a scene where the main character, Detective Richie Roberts, played by Russell Crowe, and his partner, they're both down and out detectives generally, both their professional and their private lives seem to be crumbling. And they happen to find this sum of money, $1 million, no less, in the trunk of a car. They realize it's bribe for corrupt policemen. They wait for it to be picked up, but nobody shows up. And at some point, they are faced with the choice between keeping the money or turning it in to the police quarters. And it's really safe for them to keep the money. There's no way that anyone will find out. Nobody will claim the money. It's unmarked. It's safe to keep it, and their lives would be so completely different. And yet, Richie Roberts, without any hesitation, decides to turn in the money. Now, why does this pose a problem to consequentialism? Well, I think because we know right away from the very beginning and up all the way to the end of the movie that that was the right thing to do. Turning in the money was the right thing to do. And that had nothing to do with the consequences of the action, which are quite unclear. The money doesn't constitute a lead to solving any crime, really. The money will ultimately end up in the hands of the corrupt policeman. Other cops who see Richie Roberts and his partner turning the money start to suspect them of being, being able to turn against their kind. They start to look at them as traitors. Nobody wants to be partner with them anymore. Nobody wants to work with them anymore. So their work really suffers. Richie Roberts' partner is so affected by this decision, by the fact that he could have been $500,000 rich and he gave it up for no clear reason for him. He can't deal with that, and he overdoses and ends up dead. And Richie himself doesn't seem to have any benefit. It's true, later on, just because he becomes sort of famous for his crazy honesty, he will be chosen to lead a huge, very important anti-drug operation, and is going to be successful and everything. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. All these ups and downs, all these unforeseeable consequences don't make a difference. The thing is that we know all along, the question is not even asked, why would it be? It's obvious to everyone that it was the right thing to do. And so that's a problem for consequentialism, because it has nothing to do with the consequences, but we know it right away. Now, a second way in which this example poses a problem to consequentialism. This time, it's a question that's being raised again and again throughout the movie. Why did Richie Roberts turn in the money? What was his motive? Why did he do it? So the motive is important for us when we judge the morality, the moral value of an action, and the moral character of a person. Why did he do it? And almost every character in the movie has a theory. His wife says something about how he thinks he's going to go to heaven, but he's going to go to hell like all the other crooked policemen. She says that he's honest in his police work just to buy dishonesty in all other aspects of his life, because he's been cheating on her, and he's a lousy father and provider, and he's really not good at anything but his work. That's his only claim to fame. Nobody quite gets it. At the very end, Frank Lucas asks him the same question, like, do you think that you're better than us? Does it make you feel like you're better than us? And at that point, Richie Roberts finally answers the question, and it's what we've been expecting all along. It's the obvious and simple and very humble answer that he gives. It's, I did it because it was the right thing to do, and that's that, nothing else. Um, and we can see how that motive matters. If he had turned in the money for some selfish reasons, his action would not have much moral value, and that would not show much moral character. But if he did it just because it was the right thing to do, now that action has great moral value, and that shows genuine moral character. Now, there was a German philosopher who lived in the 18th century, Immanuel Kant, was the first one to emphasize the importance of motive when we assess the morality of our actions. He thought that you can't really assess the value, the moral value of an action just by looking at the action or looking at the consequences. You have to look at the motive for which the agent acted. That actions that are in conformity or in accordance with duty could be done for all kinds of selfish, self-serving purposes. And in that case, they don't have any genuine moral worth. Or they could be done from moral duty, out of moral considerations. And in that case, those actions have genuine moral worth and they do show moral character. So for Kant, in order for an action to have genuine moral worth, it has to be not just in conformity or in accordance with duty, but it has to be done from or for the sake of moral duty. And I think that this distinction makes sense. We recognize it as an important distinction that we do make in everyday life, though it might be rather hard to apply it in practice because it's hard to know people's motives. But think about this example, which is very familiar for teachers and students. Think of two students who are taking their final exam, not very well prepared. Cheating would definitely help to get a passing grade, but the teacher is around and there is some risk associated with cheating. Well, in this situation, one student does not cheat because cheating is wrong, and the other student does not cheat because he's afraid of being caught. And it may be really hard to know, and we may never know. But that's a different problem. That's a problem of, how do we know and how can we be sure? But leaving the problem of knowledge alone, there's a distinction there that we immediately grasp. And we know that the first person who's not cheating because cheating is wrong, that person does something that has genuine moral worth, and the other one doesn't. The first person shows moral character, the other doesn't. We want in our society to raise and educate people to be honest because it's the right thing to do. People who refrain from cheating because cheating is wrong. We want them around us. We want them to be our friends. We don't want someone who's honest just because they're afraid for their reputation or they're afraid of being caught and so on and so forth. So in conclusion, there is this importance of motive in assessing the moral worth of an action that consequentialism cannot account for. For consequentialism, moral value of an action is entirely determined by its consequences. But I think that for us it's quite clear that motive matters and that the highest moral value is attributed to those actions that are done not just in conformity with duty but also from moral duty. This is an ideal that our reason instantly grasps and understands. something that elicits our greatest respect and something that we aspire to. And one of the beauties of this movie is that for a short period of time, Richie Roberts, who's otherwise a very flawed human being, but for some time, he embodies this moral ideal of doing the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.